We are in the middle of a cliffhanger. We've had the last few weeks Parshas whereby the Torah just ends in the middle of the story and resumes in the next week's Parsha. So we're kind of sitting on Spielkas waiting for what's going to happen. Now we all know the stories, but the Torah does this, and the way the Torah is broken out in the Parshas was set up like this. So at the end of last week's Parsha, end of Miketz, we had the brothers had come back with Binyamin. Yosef had sat there, had a meal with all of them. It's interesting. I don't think we covered this in the shir per se, but Yosef said, let's bring them all for a meal. They all came in and bowed down to him. Now all 11 brothers had bowed down to him, which was the fulfillment of his first dream. And Yosef is saying, I had the dreams. I can see it's happening now. I have to now get my father down and get him to bow down to me, because that was the other dream that Yaakov had interpreted for Yosef a few weeks ago in Vayigash. So they're all there. And Yosef sits there with his goblet. And he sits looking in the goblet, and he puts a ring on the top, and he looks inside and says, Reuven, you're the eldest. You go and sit over there. Looks inside, says, Shimon, you're next. I just locked you up. Yeah, you can go sit there. And he goes through all of the brothers, and he sits them down one after another till he gets to Binyamin. And he says, no, Binyamin, you haven't got a mother. He looks in his cup. He says, you haven't got a mother. You sit next to me. It's his only full brother. The others are all half brothers. They share a mother and a father. The rest of them only share a father. Sits them all down. Now, the Egyptians won't eat at the same table as the Jewish people, because it's abominable to them to eat lamb, which is we're going to learn in a few weeks' time, Korban Pesach. And so the Egyptians sit separately. Yosef and Binyamin and the brothers all lined up, and they're all astonished. How does this guy know who we are, who's the oldest, anything about us? He goes through the whole thing, and he's just looking in his cup. And so off they go, and he puts their money back into their bags, the money that they brought the first time that he'd already sent back, the money the second time back that they brought with them, puts double money back in, and make sure his silver goblet is in Binyamin's sack. And off the brothers go back to Eretz Canaan, and he sends Menashe, his son, after them. And he says, go and bring them back. And they find the goblet in Binyamin's sack. Yosef set up this whole thing. The brothers now are really, really not happy. They tear their garments. They come back to Yosef, and last week's Parsha ends that, what are we supposed to do? We'll just become your slaves. Just send Binyamin. And Yosef said, no, you can all go home. I want Binyamin to stay with me. He stole my cup. This is my magic cup of divination. I can tell anything from this cup. That's what he stole. It's not on. And so now we're having, and then the Parsha last week ends, just in English, it would be sacrilegious for me to do this. In other words, make you all my slaves. The man in whose possession the goblet was found, only he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. You go. So now we're standing there. You've got 11 brothers on one side, Yosef on the other side. And in last week's Parsha, Reuven had said that he will be responsible, Reuven being the firstborn, he'll be responsible for bringing Binyamin back. And if he doesn't bring Binyamin back, then Yaakov, his father, can kill his two children, Yaakov's own grandchildren. Yaakov said, forget it. Then Yehuda said, you know what, I will be responsible, and I will owe you a debt forever if I don't bring him back. And in the next world, I'll be held accountable for that. So now Yehuda is the leader. He's stepped up as the leader. And now we've got this whole thing between these two incredibly strong people, Yehuda and Yosef. And so last week's Parsha ends, stop, go home in peace, leave Binyamin here, and we open this week's Parsha. Vayigash elav Yehuda. Yehuda approached Yosef, and he said, Vayomer, he said, Be Adonai, if you please my master, my Lord, Yidaber na avdecha davar ba'oznei Adonai al yichar apecha ba'avdecha ki chamoicha b'kaparo. If it pleases my Lord, may your servant speak a word in your Lord's ear, and may your anger not flare up at your servant, because you're like Paro. It sounds like he's speaking in a very calm manner. And he's basically saying, from the outset, we've got to settle this score. We've got to work out what's going on. We came in here and you accused us of being spies. We told you we weren't. There's been these false charges throughout. Rashi brings from the outset. So why are you asking all these questions about our father, about our brother, who we are, where we are? We came in here just to buy grain. Were we seeking to marry your daughter and your family, get involved? We were just here to buy grain, but you carried on. And we told you everything. We didn't hold back. And this whole dialogue goes between the two of them, between Yosef and Yehuda now. They're kind of sizing each other up. It's like potential here now they don't know it's Yosef, obviously.
Were they suspicious? They must have.
They were not at all. We see it a few times that they just had no idea who this was. There was something weird. There's a lot of things that we struggle to understand. For example, in last week's Parsha, when they were sent back the first time, one of them opened their sack and took out their money, found the money in it. Rashi brings there that it was Levi. The rest of them didn't look in the sacks. They were not suspicious of anything. They didn't even think that the money would be put inside their sacks. They get home, and behold, they've got their money in their sacks. And each time they leave now, this time, knowing full well that their money was put back in their sacks the first time. They don't even check their sacks this time. There's no suspicion whatsoever. They're the honest people. When honest people deal with others, they assume other people are honest as well. We learn from these kind of things, I guess. Okay, so we told you that we've got another brother, but he's alone with his mother. His mother was dead, but he's the only one of his mother, says Rashi. If he leaves his father, he's going to die. He can't handle it. He was born, his mother died in childbirth. He's never had a real mother. If he leaves his father now, he's going to die. We couldn't bring Binyamin to you, but you forced us to bring Binyamin. And not only that, you forced our father, who's already lost one son, to now potentially die out of grief for losing a second son. This is just not on what's happening, but what you've done to us. You haven't treated us right. And our father sent us down, and we came back, and we just want to buy grain. That's our goal. Our goal is we came here, there's a famine, you have grain, we're prepared to pay full price, whatever you want, and all you're trying to do is wipe us out. You just want to kill our father, and this backwards and forwards is it's just getting to Yosef. He's like, it's really now starting to eat up at his insides, because he realizes, hang on, they've actually done tshuva. They've regretted what they've done. And so the Torah then says, in the middle of Sheni, V'lo yachal Yosef lihisapek l'chol hanitzvim alav, v'yikra hoitziu kol ish me'alav, v'lo amad ish itoi v'yisvada Yosef elechav. Yosef couldn't take it anymore. He just couldn't endure this pain anymore. And he kicked everyone out. He just said, get out. Everybody out. Remove everyone from me. So there was nobody between him and his brothers. It was just the 12 brothers in the room when he revealed himself to them. He started weeping. And he wept so loudly. And there's no one in the room. The Torah says that he wept so loudly that all of Egypt heard and Paro's household heard. So when it says Paro's household heard, Rashi brings there, the house of Paro, that's to say, his servants and members of his household, not his actual home. They didn't hear, the members of his household heard, and they had kind of got around pretty quickly that Yosef was weeping. There was something going on, something big's going on with Yosef, and these 12 people that he had called, these 11 people that he had called spies had come to visit him. So Yosef is weeping, and by Yoma Yosef, Yosef says El Echav to his brothers, Ani Yosef, I'm Joseph, I'm Joe. Little Joey, remember me? Ha'oid Avichai, my father's still alive? Now he's asked them several times, your father, my servant you've been speaking about, your father, is he still alive? He says, is my father actually still alive? And Lo yachlo echav la'anois oisoi ki nivhalu mipanav. His brothers couldn't answer him. they were disconcerted. They were just in absolute shock. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't face him. Mipanav, they could not face him. It's an interesting word in connection with Chanukah. Maybe we'll come back to it later. So Yosef says to his brothers, Vayomer Yosef Elechav, Geshu na Eli, please come closer to me. Please come and see who I am. Vayigashu, they came closer. Vayomer, Ani Yosef, I'm Yosef Achichem, your brother. Hashem mekartem oisim mitzrayma, who you sold down to Egypt. So Rashi brings there, says when he says Geshu na Elav, come close to me. He saw them backing away. They were like trembling. They didn't know what had hit them here. So no, they had absolutely no suspicion whatsoever. So how's he going to be proved to them that he's actually Yosef? Because he's got this cup of divination. Maybe he's learnt through these magical incantations about the whole story, and maybe he's not the real deal. So how's he going to prove to them? So Rashi brings there. He called them with gentle language, Loshan Raka, the Tachnonim, and he supplicated himself, and just on and on he kept going. And then eventually, Hera Lahem, he showed them Shehu Mahul, that he was circumcised. The Jewish people were circumcised. Now in last week's Parsha, Rashi brings that when Paro had asked, when the Egyptian people had come to Paro and said, what are we supposed to do? They said, go to Yosef and he will show you what to do. And Yosef showed them. He said, okay, all of Egypt has to become circumcised, because he knew his brother's family were coming down. He didn't want them to stand out and be different from the rest of Egypt. So he made all of Egypt get circumcised, according to Rashi there. But here, obviously the brothers don't know that. And so Yosef's saying, listen, this is the sign. We know this is the sign that only we have. The mitzvah from Hashem. He shows them. And he says, I'm Joseph, the brother you sold to Egypt. Don't be distressed for having sold me, because Hashem sent me ahead of you. Yosef, remember, Yosef used to say, Baruch Hashem, and Chasta Hashem, and thank you Hashem, and everything. And we said when he was in Potiphar's house, and when he was in jail, he kept thanking Hashem, and everything. How are you today? Baruch Hashem, thank God, I'm well. A standard answer, and how he's saying, Yosef realized Hashem was running everything. He said, Hashem has sent me here. We've had 2 years of famine. There's another 5 years to come. There's not going to be plowing. There's no harvest. I've got food in Egypt. Hashem sent me ahead of you to ensure the survival. We are going to survive. We're going to get through this. But Hashem sent me, he says, as a father to Paro, because I am kind of in charge of Paro. I'm a master, a ruler in the whole land of Egypt. Now, hurry up. Hurry up and go to our father. Martin, say to him, Alav, say to him, Ko Amar bincha Yosef, so says your son Yosef, Samani Elokim la'adon l'chol Mitzrayim, Samani Elohim la'adon l'chol Mitzrayim. He's made me, set me, Joseph, as a master over all of Egypt. Rudda, come down, Eli. Al Tamo, don't tarry. Just get down here as quick as you can. Don't delay. He says, the land of Goshen is waiting for you, and for you and your sons and your grandchildren, your flocks and your cattle, everything that's yours, I'm going to give you everything you need. And then he says, you don't want to be destitute in the land of Israel, in the land of Canaan, you've got to come down, everything of yours. And he says, your eyes see, and the eyes of your brother Binyamin, that's my mouth speaking, just me, Joseph. I'm Joe, your little brother. Remember Joey? That's me. Go tell my father of everything that you've seen, the glory of Egypt, and hurry and get down here. Bring my father down. So then, Vayipol al Tzavare Binyamin, Achiv, he fell on his brother Binyamin's neck, and he wept. Binyamin Bacha al Tzavarav, and Binyamin wept on his neck. Now you can imagine the meeting. They hadn't seen each other for many, many years. And they wept and wept on each other's neck. Then he kissed all his brothers and he wept with all of them. And afterwards, the brothers were prepared to speak to him. Only once they got over this initial shock of what had transpired, then they sat down and they spoke. And then the news gets to Paro. Paro hears about what's going on, that Joseph's brothers have come. And the Torah says that Vayitav Be'enei Paro Uvenei Avadav. It was pleasing in the eyes of Paro and his servants, because if we just think about it, Just trying to see what Rashi says there. Oh, he brings it in Paro's house. It means his actual house. So Paro actually heard inside his house. And I'm just thinking now, just hit me now. Originally, when Yosef was in jail, the butler had said there was a little Jew boy, this young kid, this Ivri from across the river. This, he just pushed him down. He could interpret dreams. And Paro, when Yosef came to Paro, Paro must have had some suspicion. No, this kid knows what he's doing. This kid is obviously from some really, really good lineage. Suddenly it was real. He's the son of Yaakov. Yaakov's the leading person in Yaakov. Yitzchak, Avraham, we know who they are. We know these families. Now it makes sense why Yosef was so good in leadership and such a natural leader. Look where he comes from. We understand he's not just an Ivri. He's not just from over the river. He's actually from good stock. So he says, Paro then says, take your father and your household and come to me, and I'm going to give them the best of the land of Egypt. So take wagons for your small children and for your wives and transport your father and come. Bring them all along. Don't take pity. Just bring the best of Egypt's available to you, Paro says. So the Yasuchen b'nei Israel, the sons of Israel did this. They were told, Yiten lahem Yosef agalos. Yosef gave them agalos, wagons, alpi Paro, because based on Paro's word. Yiten lahem tzeder l'darach, and he gave them provisions for the road, for the way, and they get ready to go back. To each of the brothers, he gives a change of clothing. To Binyamin, he gives 5 changes of clothing, because Binyamin was his brother, his real brother, and he felt so attached to him again suddenly now. And so he sent this to his father. It says, La'aviv shalach kazois asara chamorim. He sent to his father like this, talking about the wagons, agalos. I'll come back to that in a moment. He sent him 10 donkeys, he-donkeys laden with the best of Egypt, and 10 she-donkeys with grain and bread and food for his father for the journey. He sent his brothers off, and he said to them, don't become agitated on the way. Just go. Don't get involved, Rashi says, in discussions, in halachic disputes. Don't discuss what had happened. Just go back, get dad, bring our father Yaakov down to Mitzrayim. We need to do this now. They went up to Egypt. They came to Canaan, to Yaakov, their father, and they said to him, Vayigdu loy lemor oid Yosef chai. And they said to him, Dad, Joseph's alive. Our brother Joseph, your son, is alive. And he's the ruler over the entire land of Egypt. But he didn't believe them. And why should he believe them? He's been mourning for his child. He's convinced himself. Well, he couldn't mourn because there was no body. He didn't know anything of it. Joseph was dead. But he'd been in a state of, let's call it denial. That about Joseph. He just couldn't bring himself, he couldn't mourn. There was something blocking him mourning because Joseph wasn't actually dead, but he was in distress. He was just, it was a major problem for Yaakov. So he didn't believe them. So then they told him all the words. And so it says, Yidabru elav es kol divrei Yosef asher dibar eleihem. They told him all the words that Yosef related to them. Vayar es hagalois, and he saw the wagons. Asher shalach Yosef la seis oisai, and that Yosef had sent to transport him. Vatihi ruach Yaakov avihem, and his spirit was revived. What's this wagons? What's the business that Yosef sent him wagons, and he was only revived? His spirit was only revived when he saw the wagons, because there was a message that Yosef sent in the wagons. Yosef and Yaakov, it's brought down. Can't see it here right now. Oh, here we go. Es kol divrei Yosef, all the words of Yosef. Rashi says, Siman masalahem. They gave him a sign, because when Yosef left Yaakov, the last thing that he learned with Yaakov before he left and then was sold by the brothers was halachas of a thing called egla arufa. Egla arufa is if a body of human being is killed between two towns, There's a whole procedure they go. We don't know who killed him. They measure out between which is the nearest town, and the elders come and decapitate a calf, Egla Arufa. The calf's head is chopped off. And galos, wagon, sounds like Egla, and therefore Yosef was hinting to his father, I even am holding in the Torah that we learnt all those years ago, I'm still holding that. And then Yaakov said, okay, he's still Yosef, and Yosef is alive. It's still the Yosef that I knew, that I was bringing up, my favorite child. He's still connected to Torah, and therefore it made sense. And so with that, Yaakov realized, okay, I can now go and see Yosef. So he says, Vayom Israel, Rav Oid Yosef Beni Chai, Elcha Ve'era B'terem Amos. He said, this is too much. My son Yosef is still alive. He's living. I better go and see him before I die. I'm an old man already. We'll find out how old he is in a few minutes. And it's time I went to see my son Yosef. Let me go and see him. So he set out and he goes off to Be'er Sheva and he stops there because he needed permission from Hashem to leave the land of Canaan. He couldn't leave the land on his own. And so Hashem comes to him. Vayomer Elokim LeIsrael b'ma'aros halayla. Hashem came to Yosef and spoke to him in visions of the night. In other words, it came to him in a dream, in a prophetic dream. Vayomer, Yaakov, Yaakov, and he called him Yaakov, Yaakov. Vayomer Hineni, and said, here I am. Rashi says there that the fact that he said Yaakov, Yaakov is Lashon Chiba, a term of endearment. That Hashem is saying, I'm connected to you, I love you, I'm saying your name twice. And we have that a few times. Hashem called Avram at the Akedah, he says Avram, Avram, and Moshe is called Moshe, Moshe. Various times in the Torah where somebody's called twice, it's showing endearment. So he says, I'm here. So Hashem says, I'm the God of your father. Don't be afraid of going down to Egypt. I'm going to establish you as a great nation there. I'm going to go down with you, and I will surely bring you up. This is the prophecy that was given to Avram Avinu. Avram was told that your children will go down to another land. They will be pushed into a negative situation, let's just put it. They were not told they were going to be slaves in a foreign land. It'll be a tough living in a foreign land. Will be in galus, in exile. But then Hashem says he'll bring them up. And Yaakov is given the exact same prophecy here. And Hashem tells him, and Yosef is going to see you and place his hand on your eyes. You will be able to reunite with Yosef. Go down. So Yaakov got up from Beersheba. Sons of Yaakov transported him and their young children and their wives in the wagons which Paro sent. So we know that Paro had said, send wagons. Yosef had sent the wagons, and now Paro had sent these wagons, and they go back to Egypt. They take their livestock, their possessions, and they come to Egypt. And then the Torah lists, Ve'elu Shemois B'nai Yisrael. These are the names of the children of Israel. Haba'im Mitzrayma, who came down to Mitzrayim. Yaakov Avanav Bechor Yaakov Reuven. Yaakov and his children, the firstborn was Reuven, and then it lists all of Reuven's children. And then Shimon and Shimon's children, and Levi, his children, and Yehuda, his children, Yisachar, Zvulun, all their sons. Then mentions these are sons of Leah that she bore to Yaakov in Padan Aram. In addition to Dinah, his daughter, 33 people. It brings down that there were 33 people brought down from the union of Yaakov and Leah. And then it says, Uvnei Gad, his children, and Uvnei Asher, Asher's children. I'm not going to go through the list of all these names, but it's interesting, you hardly find any of these names being used later on or in Tanakh. Just some of them are, but most of them we don't hear much about these names that they named their children. These are the sons of Zilpah that Leah had given as his daughter. She brought to Yaakov 16 souls. We had 33 and we have 16. And then we have the sons of Rachel, Yosef and Binyamin. To Yosef he married Asnas, and they had two children, Manasseh and Ephraim, as we learned last week. And then Binyamin's sons, Binyamin had 10 sons. So all the souls of Rachel were 14. And then Dan, it says about Dan, Uvanei Dan, the sons of Dan, Chushim. Dan had one son called Chushim, but it says the sons of Dan. But Chushim was deaf, and we'll learn more about Chushim, please God, next week. In next week's Parsha, Chushim does something there as the deaf grandchild of Yaakov. So Naphtali's sons and the sons of Bilhah are 7. So we had 33, we had 16, we had 14, and we had 7. Anybody good at maths? Well, the Torah tells us, Kol hanefesh haba leYaakov, all the souls that came with Yaakov, Mitzrayim to Mitzrayim, Yotze Yerecho milvad nashe b'nei Yaakov, Kol nefesh shishim v'sheish. All the souls that came with were 66 that came down with him. And Yosef and his sons were born with him in Egypt. That was 2 plus 1. And then so we got 66 plus 3. The Torah is clearly going to have a problem next few words, because the next few words say, Beis Yaakov haba Mitzrayim shivim, 70. So it adds up to 69. There's 69 names mentioned, and the Torah says it's 70. The Torah cannot make a mistake. Torah, I think Hashem knows maths. So Rashi says there, does Rashi say it? Sure he does. Yeah, previously. All the souls come with Yaakov who left the land, come in Egypt. This is where Rashi brings, I can't actually see it inside here at the moment. Left the land, Rashi brings that the 70 is in the past tense. Accent on the last syllable. Once they got to Egypt, there were 70 because they found Yosef and his 2 sons. Okay, so this is where Rashi brings the 70. Rashi's comment is, V'nis toifsa niftoisfa lahem Yocheved. Yocheved was added to them. She was born between the walls. Yocheved, who was Moshe Rabbeinu's mother, was conceived in the land of Canaan, but was born as they got into Egypt. So she's the 7th one. So she's kind of hidden in all of that. And therefore we get to the 70 according to Rashi there. The other commentaries bring down that the 70th one was Yaakov himself. It's brought here. The Torah lists only 69 persons. This is in the Artzro Chumash. The inclusion of Yocheved, who was born at the entrance of Egypt, is as a 70 descendants, although she's not specifically mentioned, follows the Midrash and Rashi. Others include Yaakov himself in the count, because it does list Yaakov initially. And there's also a view that Hashem's presence accompanied them down to Egypt, and that was the 70th. So the Torah is hinting, the Torah tells us wrong maths intentionally to hint something to us, that Hashem's presence came down to Egypt with us, that Yaakov was the 70, or Yocheved was 70. There were 70, Torah only listed the 69 people. But it lists all of those people who came down to Egypt. Then it says, Ve'es Yehuda shalach lefanav el Yosef, laheres lefanav Goshna, ve'yavo arza Goshen. He sent Yehuda ahead of them to Yosef, and he instructed him to go to Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. What did he instruct Yehuda to do for him? Targum Onkelos mentions, according to Rashi, Lefanos lo makom, to clear a place for him and to instruct how they're going to settle in Goshen. And then it says Lefanav, before him, ahead of them. Umidrash agada lohirois Lefanav. There's the Midrash that says that he sent him ahead of them. Why? The Sakem lo base Talmud, to set up a school, to set up a yeshiva, a house of study, so that they can sit and learn Torah. Most important thing we need to do as Jewish people is set up schools. Simple as that. We need to make sure that we've got Jewish continuity through teaching Jewish children about their Jewish education. Yaakov put that in place right at the beginning of the creation of the Jewish nation. And that is something that we've seen throughout history. Wherever Jewish people come to a new place, they set up, and the place is successful, from a Torah perspective and from a Jewish life perspective, set up place of education. That's why we see Melbourne one of those places where we have so many options. There's so many schools available in Melbourne, and therefore we have learning Torah, we have education, and we have everything else that flows from that. Other cities where they were not so set on setting up academic institutions and helping people to learn about Torah and learn about Hashem, not necessarily as successful as those where we set up educational institutions, and that's from Yaakov Avinu.
And that's why also we see how people immigrated from all different other places.
In Australia, yeah. I was alluding to that. I didn't want to say it so directly. No, that's okay. No, we just need to look at the other very big city in Australia, and unfortunately, they don't have Jewish education at any level close to what we've got. Yeah. Okay, so Yosef and Yaakov now meet. So Yosef sets up his chariot and he goes out to meet his father, and he meets Israel, and he fell on his neck and he wept excessively. Similar, very same words that we had with his brothers. However, we don't have Yaakov weeping on Yosef's neck, because Rashi brings there that Yaakov did not fall on Yosef's neck, v'lo nashako, and nor did he kiss him, because the Amr Bosani, our rabbis have said, Shahaya Korei Shema, he was saying the Shema. He was davening at that time, and so he couldn't reciprocate that same feeling. And obviously, Yosef knew what was going on, but we saw that the brothers, Binyamin, and then the other brothers wept on Yosef's neck just like he wept. We don't see Yaakov weeping on his neck, and Rashi brings there because he was saying the Shema. He said, Parshas Yosef, Menachem Mendel of Kotz, citing Parshas Yosef, said when Yaakov saw Yosef, he experienced this incredible outpouring of love, so much so that he needed to channel this love somewhere, and he channeled the love towards Hashem, so he immediately recited the Shema. As opposed to it was the time of Shema, he felt, I need to connect. Hashem has given me such a wonderful thing, I need to say thank you. And that's an interesting connection to, we'll get to in a few minutes, please God, Chanukah. This whole little bit of episode here has an incredible connection to Chanukah. So Yosef said to his brothers and to his father's houses, I'm going to go and tell Paro that you've arrived. My brothers and my fathers here have come from the land of Canaan. Now he says, listen, you are shepherds and you are cattle people, and you got flocks and cattle, and you've brought it all with you. So when Paro says, what's your occupation? Tell him that we've been cattlemen, we've been shepherds since our youth. We've always had that. Our forefathers have done that. Then Paro will let you settle in the land of Goshen, because the Egyptians, remember that one of their deities was the sheep. We'll come back to that. The Korban Pesach was a sheep, and the whole story about how we took the sheep into our home, the little lamb into our home, 4 days before we brought the Korban Pesach, to show that Hashem is in control of everything, not their God, the sheep. And so we wanted to keep separate. We wanted to make sure that we had the first Jewish shtetl in history, that we were in Goshen, we were separate from the Egyptians, that we could maintain Jewish continuity, keep together, keep the Jewish people together in our own enclave. We don't get all the influences of the Western world or the Egyptian world. Egypt at the time was the leading nation of the world and was the most depraved nation of the world. Their levels of morality were about as low as it gets. And so Yosef and Yaakov did not want them to be mixing with the Egyptians. And so they settled, and they said to Paro, listen, this is what we do. Just set us aside, give us Goshen, and we'll be happy there. And so Yosef comes to Paro and he says, my fathers and brothers and their flocks have all come. He keeps setting this up. They've got cattle and everything they brought from the land of Canaan. They're in the land of Goshen. And he took 5 brothers and stood them before Paro. Rashi brings there that he brought from the weakest of the brothers. He took the 5 weakest brothers. He didn't want to show Paro the strength of the 5 strongest brothers. So he brought his, Rashi says, She'ein nira giborim, those that didn't look strong, that were not mighty looking, because Paro might look at them and say, well, these guys, I know who I'm dealing with here. I'm scared that they're going to take over. So he sent the more feeble-looking brothers of the brothers. And Rashi lists, he sent Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Schar, and Binyamin. Now, interesting enough, Shimon and Levi were the two that wiped out the whole city of Shechem. And yet these were the weakest of the brothers. So just shows the strength, incredible strength that the Shvatim, the sons of Yaakov, had. And Rashi learns it out because Moshe didn't repeat their names when Moshe blessed them right at the end of the Torah. But the mighty ones Moshe repeated. So for example, Moshe said, "V'zois Yehuda Shema Hashem Kol Yehuda." This is Yehuda. Hearken to Hashem, to Yehuda's voice. When he mentioned brothers twice, those that he mentioned twice are the stronger ones. The weaker ones were the others, and that's who he sent to see Paro. And they answered Paro, "Each of your servants is a shepherd, both we and our forefathers." And they said to Paro, "We've come to sojourn in the land because there's no grazing for our flocks in the land of Canaan because of the famine. Please allow us to dwell in the land of Goshen." Paro said to Yosef, "Your father and your brothers have come, the land of Egypt, before you. Take whatever you like, whichever part of the land you want. Let them settle in Goshen. And if there are people who are capable, make sure that they become managers of my stuff, of my land, livestock that I've got," says Paro. So then Yosef says, "Okay, good, we're ready to take them." So then he brings Yaakov before Paro. Brings Yaakov, he stood before Paro. Vayivarech Yaakov es Paro. Yaakov blessed Paro. Vayomer, he blessed him. What did he bless him with? That the river would rise up to Paro. So every time Paro went to the river would rise up. And that caused some issues later on because Paro then felt, well, he's like a god. And we'll come back. We see that coming through in the Paro, if it's the same Paro or not, because there's a dispute in the beginning of the book of Shmois. But the water would rise up to Paro, and therefore he was, well, I'm a god. The rivers are one of the gods of Egypt. And if it's rising up to me, then I must be a god. And it was the whole story of how Moshe met Paro just before the end of the exile when we were redeemed from Egypt, how he was able to play with Paro around the river. And so Yaakov blessed him, and Paro said to Yaakov, "Wow, you're an old man. You look like you're ancient." Torah says it. Paro, Vayomer Paro, El Yaakov, Kama yemei shnei chayecha, how old are you? How many of the days of your life? Why are you so old? And Yaakov says to Paro, well, the days of my life are pretty old. I'm 130. Few and bad have been the days of my life, and they've not reached the days of the lives of my forefathers in the days of their sojourning, because Avraham Avinu lived till 175. Yitzchak Avinu lived till 180, and Yaakov says, well, I'm only 130. And Yaakov blessed Paro, and he left his presence. Yosef settled his father and his brothers, and he gave them part of the land of Egypt and the land of Ramses, as Paro commanded, and Yosef sustained his father and his brothers with food according to the number of children they had. In other words, nobody was short of anything that they needed. The Torah then jumps back to talking about the beginning of the years of famine, because the brocha that Yaakov gave to Paro was that the Nile River, brought there what I said before, she says the Nile River should rise to his feet. For the land of Egypt, Egypt doesn't live on rain. Egypt lives on the river rising and falling. As the river rises, they have canals that they dig, and they get the water from the river to the fields, as opposed to relying on rainfall, which Eretz Israel relies on rainfall. And so Yaakov blessing that the Nile would come and reach Paro and irrigate the land, brought from a medrash. The years of famine ended then. Once Yaakov came down to Egypt, Hashem said, we can't have a famine in Egypt, and the famine stopped. And so now the Torah goes back and says, okay, so there was no bread in all of the land of Egypt at the beginning of the famine. in Canaan, in Egypt, and people were hungry. So Yosef gathered all the money that was found in Egypt and Canaan. People came and purchased grain from him. And then they came back to him in the second year and they said, we haven't got any more money. So Yosef took all their land from them. Bring your livestock and I'll give you food in return. So Yosef amassed a huge amount of wealth from the people of Egypt, from the surrounding countries, which became part of Paro's fortune. And in return for that, he gave them food. And he was able to sustain them for the 2 years of the first 2 years of the famine, which it ended up being only 2 years. The Torah then says that they all sold their fields because they were just overcome by this famine. It was so bad. But then the Torah says, Rak admas hakohanim loy kana kichok lakohanim ma'es paro va'ach lo es chukam asher nasan lahem paro el kain loy machru es admasam. Only the land of the Kohanim. Now the Kohanim, Rashi says they're the priests. Any priest is called a Kohen. So we know that our priestly family are known as Kohen. That's why so many people are called Cohen. Interesting enough, why so many Kohanim called Katz? Katz is a Kohen term. Katz stands for Kohen Tzedek, righteous Kohen. Many of the Kohanim names and the names of Leviim are connected to being Kohanim and Leviim. There's some connection to it. Segal, is Sgan Levi. It's an abbreviation for Deputy Levi, which is something that didn't actually exist really as a role. There was a Sgan Kohen, but all the names, you can often look at Jewish people's names and work out if they're a Kohen or a Levi. Obviously, the name Cohen is a giveaway, but there are many people who have the surnames who are not for various reasons over time, and many surnames are just made up. But often people's surnames that they took were because they were a Kohen or a Levi. But the Kohen here just means the priests of Egypt, the regular priests. So the priests, he didn't acquire their land. They were treated differently because the priests were given a stipend by Paro. Paro gave them a stipend, and therefore they didn't need to sell their land. So they kept their land. Now, interestingly enough, you look at, and I had a quick look this morning to try and find this in other countries. I know Australian tax law. In Australia, anybody who's acting as clergy in any religion is only taxed on their salary. They're not taxed on fringe benefits. So priests and rabbis and imams and whatever else, the organization will structure a salary for them whereby they get a lot more fringe benefits than cash salary. Based on this, as far as I can tell, it goes all the way back to this, because the priests in Egypt and Joseph treated them differently. It still goes on. In Europe, there are different taxes for clergy than there are for everybody else. It seems to be changing. I had a very quick look this morning to see where it was prevalent. I didn't spend more than about 3 minutes on it, but it's certainly something that's still going on in our times, which happened back then. The next thing that Joseph does, he says to the people, I've acquired you this day and your land. In other words, you've all been sold to me. Okay, you've all got grain. Now what are you going to do? Here's seed, go and sow. But I want you to take 1/5 of what you earn and give it to Paro. You're putting a tax system in place here. And he's also putting a system in place for us to know that we should be giving Maaseh. We're going to give Maaseh, Trumas and Maaseh and various different gifts to Kohanim, to the Leviim, to poor people, to keep a country going. He's putting in place a whole tax type system, but we should know that what we earn is not ours. It's all from Hashem. And therefore we need to give the appropriate amounts to people who are less fortunate than us. The whole mitzvahs of tzedakah, of trumas and maaseh all come out from this, that it's embedded in our DNA. So, and the Parsha ends that Yosef saved their lives, and Yosef and his servants, he put the statute on until this day regarding the land of Egypt, for 1/5 to Paro, and only the priest's land didn't become Paro's. And Yisrael, Yashav Yisrael be'eretz Mitzrayim, be'eretz Goshen. Yaakov settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen. Ve'achazu ba v'yifru v'yirbu ma'od, and they were fruitful and they multiplied incredibly. The Jewish people started multiplying and were living in the land of Goshen. What has all that got to do with Chanukah?
One question, does Goshen still exist?
Probably is a land in Egypt, I don't know. It was some part of Egypt. If you look on a map of Egypt, you find Goshen, I don't know. There might be an Egyptian name for it. Okay, so we play dreidel. One of the things we do on Chanukah is play the dreidel. Now, the dreidel there is a game. And this dreidel happens to give us the rules on it. It says, okay, let's start with nun. Nun. So if you spin it and it lands on nun, you do nothing. There's a pot of lollies in the middle. If it lands on shin, you put one in. If it lands on hay, you take half the pot. And if it lands on gimel for Gidon, for me, get it all. You take everything. That's a good game for me, yeah. So I land on gimel always. So we played dreidel. Dreidel is an old game. Dreidel has got something to do with this week's Parsha. We'll come back to it in a second. This dreidel says nun gimel shin hay. If you pick up a dreidel in Israel, it does not say nun shin gimel hay. Nun shin gimel hay means nes gadol, a great miracle. Haya sham, happened there. In Israel, it's got a pay, not a shin. Nes gadol haya po. A great miracle happened here in Israel. There's a difference. Where if you bring an Israeli dreidel back to Chutz La'aretz, you can't play with it. If you take this dreidel to Israel, you can't play with it. Well, you can, but it is different. But you don't. Okay, so now if I change these letters around and I go like this, Gimel, Nun, Shin, Hey. Goshen. Remember, Yaakov sent Yehuda ahead of them to Goshna. Goshna is to Goshen. The dreidel is a huge connection to what they did in Goshen. What did they do in Goshen? They separated themselves. They made sure they were Jewish people, that they were the Jewish people who were different. And what was the point of the Egyptians? Of the Greeks? What did the Greeks try and do? The Greeks' goal in life was to assimilate us into Greek culture. So we had Alexander of Macedon. I think we discussed a little bit of this last week. Let's go through a brief overview of it. Alexander comes along. The Gemara calls him Alexander of Macedon because he came from this little place called probably what we call Macedonia today, or somewhere connected to that. His father Philippus, took over a number of countries. He was the leader of Macedon, took over Greece. Alexander comes along and starts conquering the whole world. Basically, the known world is under Alexander's rule. He comes to Israel. He walks through every country he goes through, and he sees the Kohen Gadol, and he bows down to the Kohen Gadol. Kohen Gadol's wearing his full 8 vestments, and everyone's going, "What is going on, Alex? This is not on." He says, "No, I see this man in a dream. Every time I go out to battle, he comes and gives me a blessing, and I win the battle because of him." And so, because of that, because Alexander didn't conquer Eretz Israel, Yehuda at the time. Now we're talking, just in terms of history, we're talking approximately 100 years into the second, just over 100 years into the Second Temple period. So about 300 years before the Common Era. So Alexander doesn't conquer Yehuda, he conquers the rest of the known world. For that reason, the only non-Jewish name you can call a person to the Torah with is Alexander. It became a Jewish name, even though it's a Macedonian Greek name. So there are many people called Alexander. And it's the only name. You have like Yehuda Yosef ben Alexander, or whatever name. I called up somebody yesterday, I was Gabbai yesterday, I called up somebody whose father's name was Alexander. It's the only non-Hebrew, non-Jewish name. We have Yiddish names thrown in and other names, but that is it, because of what Alexander didn't wipe out Eretz Israel. But Alexander died at a very young age. He was about 31 or 32. And the kingdom split. To 3 or 4 different generals took over. The 2 that are relevant for us are the Ptolemy Empire of Egypt and the Seleucid Empire of Syria, the Syrian area. If you think of a map, you've got Egypt here, you've got Syria here, And what's slap bang in the middle? Eretz Israel. And so these two generals and leaders were clashing over the next decades until you got to a point where Israel was being thrown from pillar to post. But their whole culture was Hellenism. And what they wanted the Jews to do was embrace the Hellenistic culture. Hellas, meaning Greece, the Hellenistic culture, and the Jewish people started becoming more Greek than they were Jewish. They were still Jewish, and they kept the Jewish religion. They were becoming more and more involved in Greek culture. Exactly what Yaakov did not want to happen in Goshen was happening in Eretz Israel. Along comes Antiochus, and Antiochus the fourth eventually, one of the Seleucid leaders, and he basically puts in a decree that we're going to stop the Jewish religion. Yehuda HaMaccabee and his brothers get up and they fight back. And the five brothers, and according to different opinions, not sure exactly the size of the army, according to Sun, the army was just the five of them, taking on the might of the Assyrian Greek army, who had tanks in those days. A tank of those days was the elephant. Brought down that they had elephants that they used. They used to ride on elephants, which would wipe out. We've all seen the destructions elephants bring. And so Yehuda and his four brothers take on the might of this Syrian Greek army. And over a period of 3 years, they had taken over the temple. They had brought in false deities into the temple. The service, they'd slaughtered the pigs in the temple as offerings to their gods. They'd done everything that we don't want to do. And the Jewish people were more and more becoming enveloped into this Hellenistic culture. To the degree that the Greeks introduced the Olympics. And the Olympics were something that they did naked. It was a sports event that they'd run naked. The Jewish people had a bris milah, again connecting to this Parsha. There were Jewish people at the time who reversed their bris milah, however they did it, so that they would not look different when they were running naked against in the Olympics. Things like this were happening. We're moving further and further away. What did Antiochus attack? What did he want to get rid of? Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and bris milah. Those were the three things he wanted to wipe out from the Jewish people, because those three things have kept us distinct and different from everybody else. If we think about Chanukah, I'll come back to Chanukah in a moment, but Chanukah, every Chanukah has a Shabbos. Tomorrow and Wednesday is Rosh Chodesh. It's always Rosh Chodesh in Chanukah. And bris milah is 8 days. Chanukah is 8 days. There's some connections between those three mitzvahs and Chanukah itself, the way it was put in place by the rabbis after the miracle. But they come into the temple and they discover, and the temple has been pillaged and messed up, and it's become a place of idol worship. So everything in the temple is tameh, it's impure. And therefore, they can't use impure oil to light the menorah. Now, there is a concept, tumah hutra b'tzibur, that if everybody is tameh, if the majority of people are impure, and everything else, the oil and everything is impure, then the impurity is allowed to be used until you can become pure. And so there is this concept that, okay, we can use impure things, and it overrides the need for purity. But the Chashmonaim, their surname, they were Chashmonaim, but they were known as the Chashmonaim. They were adamant that they needed to be at the highest level possible, and they needed to search out and find. And they dug, and it says they dug, and they found one jar of oil with the Kohen Gadol seal on it. Most oil never had a Kohen Gadol seal on it, but they found this jar of oil. And they realized how much oil there is. There's a dispute, there's a discussion as actually what actually happened with this jar of oil. They lit the menorah. They cleaned out the temple. They're ready to do the service. Now we need to light the menorah. They knew that either oil was a 4-day journey from where they were. They could go and get oil in the Galil, which would take them 4 days to get there, pick up the oil, and 4 days to get back. 8 days return journey. All they knew it's going to take them 8 days to press oil. And so they knew they needed to take this oil and needed to last them 8 days. So therefore, they could do one of two things. They could not rely on an absolute miracle. But maybe they just put the oil in for once and they said, look, we'll put in and we'll see what happens. Or did they divide the oil in 8 portions, knowing that they needed 8 days, and 1/8 of the oil lasted for a full day, and then they put the second 1/8 of the oil in the second day until they could get pure oil from 4 days' journey away, or they could press oil. Or did they just rely on this miracle? Either way, they had this incredible miracle that this little jar of oil that was enough supply for 1 day lasted for 8. The next year they came along. Now remember, the war continues, and a lot of the war was not directly against the Assyrians, it was against the Jews. It was a civil war amongst the Jews in many cases, because many of the Jews felt that we need to be more Greek than the Greeks. I mean, Hellenism was the religion of the time. I'm using religion in quotes. But many of the Jews were so involved in this way of life that they were outwardly kind of Jewish, but they were not really. They were practicing Hellenists. And so the fight was between a lot of them. And the brothers, over the period of time, were killed in battle until only one was left. And he became the Kohen Gadol, and he became the leader of the Jewish people. But the year after the miracle, the next year, they realized and they looked back and they said, we've had an 8-day miracle. These 8 days, now the Jewish calendar doesn't work in a linear fashion. The Jewish calendar doesn't work, well, today is, what are we, the 30th, 31st of December, what are we? 30th of December. So on the 30th of December next year, it doesn't work like that. It just doesn't work long like that. The Jewish calendar is cyclical. When we come back in the cycle, we're hopefully going upward spiral, but when we come back to that point in time in the year, those same spiritual forces that were at play a year ago are at play now. And so when we come to Rosh Hashanah, we know that it's a time of judgment. And so the world comes around on the 1st of Tishrei. We know that on the 15th of Nisan, which is on Pesach, there is the spirituality of redemption. And so they didn't know whether the 25th of Kislev and the 8 days that follow had that same spiritual connection of light coming down until the next year. And so the next year comes along and, we've got that same energy. They could sense the spiritual energy. And so they created an 8-day festival starting from them. And the question is, they're now in the temple. The war went on for many years. We're talking about 170 odd years, 165 years after the establishment of the Second Temple. We've got a whole period of time, 200 plus years, of the Hashmonaim and various other leaders. But they were now re-establishing Jewish life the way they wanted it to be. That was their goal. They wanted to have that locked off Jewish life. We need to make sure that there is Jewish continuity. We need to make sure that Jewish people are connected to learning Torah, to doing the mitzvahs, to doing what we need to do to make sure that our children marry Jewish. That's really the goal. Because if we can keep that going, we can keep as insular as we can whilst living in the society, then we are still going to keep Jewish life going. That's what Yaakov Avinu didn't want to happen. And that they tried to put in place. And from that point in time there, the Second Temple ran as best they could. The problem was in the first temple, in fact, all the way back to Moshe and Aaron, there was a split. There were the Kohanim, and there was certainly from David HaMelech's time, but until then, there was always the political leadership and the religious leadership. The problem was that Yehuda is supposed to be, Yehuda being David HaMelech was from the tribe of Yehuda, was supposed to be the kings, and the Kohanim was supposed to be separate from the tribe of Levi. They were supposed to run the religious life. The Hashmonaim were Kohanim, and the Hashmonaim made themselves into political leaders as well. They became the kings, so to speak. That couldn't happen. And so slowly, things got a bit lower and lower and worse off, because Jewish people need to have that split. I'll use that term between church and state. Horrible term, but it comes from us, in that we did have this division of power. We needed to be separate. We needed to make sure that spiritual life was contained within and taught to people by the Kohanim, by the Leviim, and that the tribe of Yehuda was in charge of the political life. And so over the period of the rest of the Second Temple, things started getting worse. The Romans then came in, and the Roman occupation went along until in the year 70, unfortunately, the temple was destroyed. But in all that period of time, from the Chanukah miracle until very close to the end of the destruction of the temple, they were lighting a menorah in the temple. So the question is, what did people do for Chanukah in those period of time? What was Chanukah set up to do? Just going to grab a siddur. So we say in our davening every day, and I opened on the exact right page. I just opened the siddur and it landed on the page. Thank you, Hashem. So we say in our davening, in the prayer of Moedim, in the thank you prayer of Moedim, and in benching during Chanukah, in Nodelacha, again, where we say thank you to Hashem, we add in a paragraph. Both on Chanukah and on Purim, they're different, but the first lines are the same, and then it gives us the history, a little bit of Chanukah. So we say, Ala nisim v'al purkan al givros v'al shuas al mechos shasit lavaseni bayamim ha'hem bazman hazeh. For the miracles, for the salvation, for the mighty deeds, for the victories and the battles which you performed, you talked to Hashem, for our forefathers in those days, bayamim ha'hem bazman hazeh, at this time. That's the significance of the spiral. That the miracle happened in those days. Way back when? 2,500 years ago. But at this time, the time we've come to now, on the 25th of Kislev and the 8 days that follow, at this time there is that spiritual energy of light that comes in the world. Because two things happened in creation. One was that Hashem created light and darkness on the first day. But on the fourth day, he created the sun and the moon. So there was some kind of spiritual light, or Haganus, it's called the spiritual light that was there before the sun and the moon were able to give us light and night and day and night. Also, Adam HaRishon went through, Adam and Chava were born on Friday. They had 12 hours of Friday, 12 hours Friday night, and 12 hours Shabbos day. 36 hours. We had 36 hours of this spiritual light for Adam then, Adam and Chava, and we had 36 hours of that spiritual light in the beginning of creation. That spiritual light, Hashem hid away after the sin. Through our lighting of Chanukah lights, we have 36 candles. We have 44, but 8 are the shamash. We only have a shamash because we learned last week we're not allowed to get benefit from the candles, so we add the extra candle. The 8 lights of Chanukah, totaling the 36, is that spiritual light coming back. So what is our job? In the temple, if they didn't light a menorah in their own homes because they had the menorah in the temple, remember the temple menorah is a 7-branch menorah. Ours is a 9-branch menorah, 8 plus 1. And so they, after the destruction of the temple, the rabbis brought in, according to some opinions, we need to keep this menorah going. We need to make sure that there is light, that this light that the menorah in the temple gave off, the spiritual light that was able to grab people and bring them close to Hashem, that's available in our homes as well. And so for the 8 days of Chanukah, we have that in our home. But what happened before that? What's the whole story of Chanukah? That's the story that we get, which I'm not going to go through in detail, but what we say after we say Ala Nisim, we say B'mei Matisyahu ben Yochanan Kohen Chashmonai Uvanav, the days of Matisyahu, the son of Yochanan, the high priest, the Chashmonaim, and his sons, when the wicked Greek kingdom rose up against your people. What was their goal? To make us forget Torah and compel us to stray from mitzvahs, from the will of Hashem. You, Hashem, in your great mercy, stood up for us at that time of distress. You took up their grievance, judged their claim, avenged their wrong, delivered the strong into the hands of the few, the many into the strong into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure, wicked in the hands of the righteous. All of these things Hashem did for us. We were small and tiny. We had 5 people or a few hundred soldiers against this mighty army, and yet Hashem did these incredible miracles for us. You made a great day. You made your name holy in the world. For your people Israel, you worked a great victory and salvation this very day. Therefore, your children came to Holy of Holies, your house. They cleansed your temple, purified the sight of your holiness, kindled the lights in the courtyard of your sanctuary, and established these 8 days of Chanukah. Why did they establish these 8 days of Chanukah? L'hodos, l'halel, l'shimcha hagadol, to express thanks and praise for your great name. That's what Chanukah is about. Chanukah is about thanking and praising Hashem. So what do we do on Chanukah? How do we thank Hashem? Say Ala Nisim. we give tzedakah. There's a big thing to give extra tzedakah on the 8 days of Chanukah. And we say Hallel. We say full Hallel on the 8 days of Chanukah. We don't say full Hallel on Pesach. On the first 2 days of Pesach, we say full Hallel. On the last 6, we don't. We only say what's called half Hallel. We leave out 2 parts of paragraphs. And on Rosh Chodesh, we only say half Hallel. But on some days of Rosh Chodesh, we don't say half Hallel. And that is the month of Kislev. Tomorrow and Tuesday, Wednesday is Rosh Chodesh. We say full Hallel then. And we don't say any Hallel on Rosh Hashanah, just as Rosh Chodesh. So there are 2 months of Rosh Chodesh that are different to the rest. One is now, Kislev, or into Teves, into Shvat, and in Tishrei on Rosh Hashanah we don't say half Hallel, we say full or none. It's brought down, somebody mentioned the other day that Rabbi Tat said in the name of the Vilna Gaon, we don't say full Hallel on the 6th. We don't say Hallel on the 6th. Full Hallel on the 6 days of Pesach, on Rosh Hashanah, the 1 day of Rosh Hashanah. We have 2, but 1 day of Rosh Hashanah, and on Rosh Chodesh. And so therefore we have 8 days of Chanukah where we say full Hallel to make up for that. That was brought down by Rabbi Tat in the name of the Gra. But we say Hallel, we give tzedakah, we thank Hashem for what we've got. Because at the end of the day, it's brought down, we spin a dreidel. We spin a dreidel from the top. The other rabbinic Yom Tov festival that we have is Purim, coming up in a few months' time. In Purim, the standard thing is to spin a graga. It's not a graga, but we spin a graga from the bottom. Okay, we can also spin a dreidel upside down, but that's not the point of this discussion. We spin a dreidel from the top and a graga from the bottom, because in Purim, the miracle happened from Esther and the Jewish people fasting, and everything that we did from below. It was all us connecting up to Hashem. Chanukah was a time where Hashem said He needed to bring back everything, and Hashem delivered things from the top. And therefore, on Chanukah, we have to be extra effort in thanking Hashem, in thanking those around us, those people that we're connected to, people who do good things for us. Just making sure that we are very, very thankful for everything we've got, that we do give a little bit of extra tzedakah, and that we do praise Hashem because of all the miracles that He did for us and for our forefathers at this time.